Welcome to our deep dive. Really excited to dig into the psychology of money today.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book. I think everyone should read it at least once.
It really gets you thinking differently about finances.
It's not just about, crunching numbers and picking stocks.
Right. It's about understanding how we think about money.
Exactly. Like, why do we make the financial decisions we do?
And it's all based on,
Excerpts from Morgan Housel's book.
yeah, Morgan Housel.
He uses these great stories to illustrate his points.
I love that about his writing.
Like the story of Riled Reid, the janitor who,
Oh, yeah, who ended up amassing a fortune.
yeah, a fortune
And,
by living frugally and investing consistently.
and he contrasts that with Richard Fiscone.
Right, the Harvard MBA who went bankrupt.
It's like, whoa, a fancy degree doesn't guarantee financial success.
No, not at all. It really challenges those assumptions.
So, I mean, we're going to be exploring all sorts of questions like,
Why do people buy lottery tickets when they can't afford emergencies?
yeah, or why are we so bad at saving for retirement?
Or why does Bill Gates emphasize having enough cash to cover like a year's worth of payroll, even if revenue dries up?
These are questions we've all probably pondered at some point, right?
Definitely. And Housel provides some really insightful answers.
The first thing that jumped out at me was the idea that we all see money differently.
That's so true. We each have our own unique lens.
I was fascinated by that story about John F. Kennedy and how he couldn't really grasp the severity of the Great Depression.
Yeah, because his family actually prospered during that time.
It just shows how much our own experiences shape our perceptions.
Totally. Like someone who grew up in poverty might be incredibly risk averse.
Right, whereas someone whose parents made a killing in the stock market might be more inclined to, gamble on investments.
Our upbringing, exposure to inflation, even our birth year.
All of these factors play a role in how we view money.
It creates a sort of financial fingerprint, unique to each of us.
That makes me think about how my own childhood experiences are probably influencing my decisions today.
Oh, absolutely. We all carry that baggage with us.
I'm definitely more cautious than some of my friends, probably because I didn't grow up with a lot of financial stability.
It's not about being smart or dumb. It's just about recognizing that we all come to this with different backgrounds.
And that leads to the next big idea, that outward success or failure doesn't always tell the whole story.
Housel describes luck and risk as being like doppelgangers.
I love that analogy. They're inseparable, always lurking in the shadows.
Right, constantly influencing our lives in ways we can't always predict or control.
The example of Bill Gates and his childhood friend Ken Evans really drove that point home for me.
They were both brilliant, driven kids, but their paths diverged dramatically.
Gates became, well, Bill Gates, a tech titan.
And Evans tragically died in a climbing accident.
It makes you realize that sometimes it's not just about talent or hard work.
Chance plays a role, sometimes a bigger role than we'd like to admit.
It's like, what if things had gone differently? Could Evans have achieved the same level of success as Gates?
Or would Gates have taken a different path if certain circumstances had changed?
It makes you question this idea of, people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps.
It's often more nuanced than that. There are so many factors at play.
It's a reminder to be a little more humble, maybe a little less judgmental of others.
Definitely. And on the flip side, it's a reminder to be kind to ourselves when things don't go our way.
Okay, so this next idea is something Housel calls the hardest financial skill to master.
Getting the goalpost to stop moving.
I love that phrase. It's so relatable.
It's about recognizing that enough isn't about having too little.
It's about recognizing that wanting more and more can actually lead to unhappiness.
He tells the story of Rajat Gupta, the guy who was worth like $100 million
But still risked it all to become a billionaire.
and end up in prison.
It's like, when is enough enough? Why wasn't $100 million enough for him?
It speaks to the psychological side of ambition, the insatiable desire for more.
It's like keeping up with the Joneses, only the Joneses are billionaires in this case.
You're constantly comparing yourself to those who have more, which can create this never-ending cycle of striving.
So how do we get that goalpost to stop moving? What does enough look like?
It's about defining what truly matters to you, what brings you a sense of fulfillment and security.
It's about finding that internal compass, that sense of contentment, rather than constantly chasing external validation.
And it's a constant process, a journey of self-discovery, not a destination.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, Housel makes this brilliant analogy about saving money being like energy efficiency.
I love this analogy. It's so practical.
It's like we're always looking for ways to increase our income, to earn more.
Which is like searching for new sources of energy.
But what if we focused on saving more of what we already have?
That's like energy efficiency, using less energy to achieve the same results.
It's about being more mindful of our spending, making our resources stretch further.
He uses the example of the oil crisis in the 70s.
We didn't solve it by just finding more oil, right?
We had to get creative, building more fuel-efficient cars, homes, and factories.
We had to do more with less.
And that's a principle we can apply to our finances as well.
It's not always about earning more. It's about being more efficient with what we have.
It's about building a strong financial foundation that can weather the inevitable storms.
So speaking of building a strong foundation, Housel throws out this intriguing concept that wealth is what you don't see.
It's so counterintuitive, right? We tend to associate wealth with, like, fancy cars and big houses.
He tells that story about the car enthusiast who realized he was always fixated on the cars at fancy events.
But he rarely paid attention to the drivers.
It's like we're so focused on the outward symbols of wealth that we miss the bigger picture.
True wealth, according to Housel, is about the financial assets you've accumulated.
The things you haven't yet converted into stuff you can see.
It's about having options, having freedom and flexibility to make choices that align with your values.
So it's not about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about building a financial cushion that gives you security.
It's about the difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Rich being about your current income.
And wealthy being about the assets you've accumulated over time.
That's a powerful distinction. It's about thinking long term.
It's about building something that will last, something that will provide you with peace of mind.
Okay, so how do we build that kind of wealth? How do we get that snowball rolling?
Well, Housel highlights one of the most powerful forces in investing: compounding.
I love how he drops that stat about Warren Buffett.
That 99.9% of his wealth came after he turned 50.
It's mind-blowing. It really highlights the magic of compounding.
It's like a snowball rolling downhill, gathering more snow as it goes.
The key is to start early and be patient.
Time is your greatest ally when it comes to compounding.
He compares Buffett to Jim Simons, a hedge fund manager who actually had higher average returns.
But Simon started investing later in life.
And if he'd started as early as Buffett, his wealth would be astronomically higher.
Even with slightly lower returns.
It shows that time is the real game changer.
It's not just about finding the next hot stock. It's about letting that snowball effect do its magic over time.
Now, this next idea might seem a bit counterintuitive, but Housel argues that it's okay to be irrational sometimes.
Especially when it comes to investing.
Wait, aren't we supposed to be making rational, data-driven decisions?
Of course. But Housel says there's a difference between what's mathematically optimal
and what's actually doable in the real world.
He uses the example of a study on leveraged investing.
Mathematically, it could work.
But most people can't handle the emotional roller coaster that comes with it.
It's like even if you know intellectually that market volatility is normal, seeing your portfolio plummet can be terrifying.
It can trigger a panic response, making you sell at the worst possible time.
So it's about finding a balance between logic and emotion.
Making decisions that are reasonable, even if they're not strictly rational.
It's about recognizing that we're human, we have feelings.
And those feelings can sometimes get in the way of making sound financial decisions.
Okay, this next concept is a bit mind-bending. The idea that the world is surprising.
Housel illustrates this with that thought experiment about the time-traveling alien.
Oh yeah, the alien who visits Earth in 2007, right before the financial crisis.
And then again in 2009, after the world has seemingly fallen apart.
But from the alien's perspective, nothing tangible has changed.
The cities, the infrastructure, the technology, it's all still there.
But the narrative has shifted dramatically.
From optimism and growth to fear and uncertainty.
And that shift in narrative had a huge impact on how people behaved, how they invested, how they spent.
Even though the underlying fundamentals hadn't drastically changed.
It shows how powerful narratives are, how they shape our perceptions of reality.
And how those perceptions can influence our behavior in profound ways.
It's a reminder to be aware of the narratives we're buying into, to question our assumptions.
Because those narratives can change quickly and unexpectedly.
Which brings us to Housel's emphasis on the importance of building in room for error.
He uses the analogy of blackjack card counters.
They know when the odds are in their favor.
But they never bet everything they have.
Because they understand that even with a statistical edge, they could still lose.
It's about managing risk, about having a margin of safety.
So how do we build in room for error in our own financial lives?
Well, it starts with having an emergency fund. a cushion to absorb unexpected expenses.
It's about diversifying our investments, not putting all our eggs in one basket.
It's about having a backup plan, a plan B, in case things don't go as expected.
It's about recognizing that life is unpredictable and being prepared for the inevitable curveballs.
It's not about being pessimistic. It's about being realistic.
And it's about being kind to ourselves when things don't go according to plan.
Because we're all going to make mistakes. It's part of being human.
Now, before we move on to the next section, I want to emphasize one last point.
Which is?
That no one is crazy when it comes to money.
I love that reminder. It's so important.
We all have our own unique experiences, our own values, our own goals.
What might seem crazy to one person might make perfect sense to another.
It's about respecting those differences, understanding that there's no one right way to manage money.
It's about finding what works for you, what aligns with your own circumstances and aspirations.
And it's about being open to learning from others, even if their approach is different from ours.
Because there's always something new to discover, always a different perspective to consider.
And with that, let's take a quick break to gather our thoughts and come back refreshed for the next part of our deep dive into the psychology of money.
Picking up on that idea that no one's crazy, when it comes to money.
Right, we all have our own logic.
Let's talk more about Hussel's concept of being reasonable.
Reasonable, not rational, right?
Yeah, reasonable, not rational in financial decisions.
Kind of a paradox, isn't it?
A little bit. We're always told to be rational.
Especially with money.
Exactly. But he gives this fascinating historical example.
How?
A doctor who prescribed inducing fevers in patients.
Fevers?
Yeah, to treat syphilis.
Huh. That sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Right.
Not exactly how we think about fevers these days.
Definitely not. But it turns out he was onto something, even though it was risky at the time.
Risky how?
Well, inducing a fever can be dangerous if not done carefully.
I see, yeah.
But fevers can actually help the body fight infection.
So this doctor, he was like ahead of his time.
In a way, his intuition challenged conventional wisdom.
And it led to an effective treatment.
Even though it was unconventional, So
sometimes these counterintuitive ideas, they can be worth exploring.
Exactly. And that's Housel's point about investing.
Okay, how so?
He argues that focusing too much on, those theoretically perfect strategies
Right.
can sometimes backfire.
Lead to worse outcomes than...
Then embracing a bit of reasonable irrationality.
I see. Like that study on leveraged investing.
Perfect example.
It works on paper.
Mathematically, it makes sense.
But very few people can actually stomach it emotionally.
Exactly.
It's like watching your retirement account plummet.
Even if you understand intellectually that the market will probably rebound,
Right.
it's still terrifying.
And that fear can lead to bad decisions.
Impulsive decisions, yeah, like selling at the bottom.
So what's the alternative?
It's about finding strategies that are intellectually sound,
Okay.
but also emotionally manageable.
So, like, not just about the numbers.
Right, it's got to feel right, too.
I'm thinking about this in terms of finding investments you actually connect with.
Like Housel talks about loving your investments.
Yeah, having a genuine interest in what you're putting your money into.
It can help you weather those market storms.
Because you're not just chasing returns.
You believe in the underlying companies or assets.
You're in it for the long haul.
Makes it easier to ride out those bumps in the road.
Speaking of bumps in the road, let's talk about Housel's assertion that the world is surprising.
Always got to be prepared for the unexpected.
That story about the time-traveling alien, it really highlights that point.
Yeah, the alien visiting in 2007.
And then again in 2009.
Seeing the same infrastructure, but feeling completely different about the state of the world.
It's a powerful metaphor.
It shows how narratives can shift so quickly.
And how those narratives influence our behavior.
Even when the facts haven't changed that much.
We're all susceptible to that.
It's like how much of our financial decision-making is driven by those stories we hear.
The stories we tell ourselves.
About the economy, the market, even our own capabilities.
We got to be aware of those narratives.
And how they might be shaping our choices.
Even if we're not consciously aware of it.
It's a good exercise to step back and question those assumptions.
See if they're actually based on, solid ground.
Because remember, narratives can change really fast.
Like the story we all believed in 2007 about ever-rising housing prices.
Gone, just like that.
And the people who were most caught up in that narrative, they often lost the most.
It's a tough lesson.
It highlights the importance of being prepared for the unexpected.
Building in that margin of safety.
Which is where Housel's advice about room for error comes in.
Absolutely, whether it's having emergency savings.
Or diversifying our investments.
Or choosing a career path with some flexibility.
These strategies can help us weather those storms.
Because Let's face it, life throws curveballs.
I like that blackjack analogy.
Even the card counters, they don't bet everything.
Because they know they could be wrong?
It's about acknowledging that risk is always present.
So it's not about eliminating risk entirely.
It's about managing it in a way that allows you to stay in the game
To bounce back from those setbacks.
instead of getting knocked out completely.
So we're not just chasing the highest returns,
We're building in that buffer
that margin of safety.
to protect us from those unpredictable moments.
Speaking of long-term thinking,
Yeah.
I want to hear more about Housel's discussion on how our views on money and spending have changed over time.
Especially in America, right?
Yeah, the whole consumerism thing.
He says to understand the psychology of the modern consumer.
We have to understand the historical forces that shape their behavior.
It's a fascinating journey through the decades.
Take us back in time,
Okay, so let's start with the post-World War II era,
a time of great change.
a major shift in American consumer behavior.
Lots of optimism, but also uncertainty,
Millions of soldiers returning home,
looking to rebuild their lives.
and there was this fear that the economy might tank again.
Like back into another depression.
The question is, how did they avoid that?
Yeah, what happened?
Well, a few key factors.
Okay.
First, they kept interest rates low.
Which made borrowing money easier,
Exactly. People could buy homes, cars, all sorts of goods,
stimulating the economy.
keeping people employed
It was like a deliberate push to encourage spending.
to fuel economic growth.
Makes sense?
And then you had the rise of consumer credit,
Credit cards and all that.
making it even easier to buy things you couldn't afford up front.
Buy now, pay later.
It was a huge cultural shift.
Moving away from that Depression-era mindset of saving every penny.
People started to embrace the idea of using credit to improve their lives.
It was a time of incredible prosperity.
New appliances, cars, gadgets, all becoming available to the average American.
Like a golden age of consumerism.
And the key here is that the gains were more equally distributed.
So everyone was benefiting.
Wages were rising for everyone.
Not just the wealthy elite.
It contributed to a sense of shared prosperity.
The American dream felt within reach.
And debt wasn't seen as a burden.
Because incomes were rising.
People were confident about the future.
It was seen as a tool for upward mobility.
A way to participate in this collective vision of a better life.
But then things started to change in the 1970s.
Yeah, the party couldn't last forever.
What happened?
The economy got hit with a series of shocks.
Like what?
The oil crisis.
Oh yeah, gas prices went through the roof.
Inflation soared.
And we had a recession.
Interest rates climbed.
That carefree optimism started to fade.
It was a time of upheaval, not just economically.
Socially and politically, too.
The Vietnam War, civil rights protests, political assassinations.
A lot of turmoil.
And Housel argues that this is when we start to see cracks in the American economy.
The cracks start to show.
Growth continues, but it becomes more uneven.
The gap between the rich and poor widens.
That sense of shared prosperity starts to erode,
The American dream becomes more elusive for some.
while others continue to prosper.
It's like a two-tiered system.
And Housel suggests that one of the most significant shifts
What's that?
was a change in expectations.
What do you mean?
For decades after the war, there was this idea
Yeah,
that everyone should be able to achieve a similar standard of living.
regardless of income.
But as the economy became more unequal,
That expectation became harder to maintain.
it was no longer the reality for many.
The gap between lifestyles became more pronounced.
The American dream started to feel more like a myth.
And this disconnect between expectations and reality,
It's fueled a lot of the social and political tension we see today,
like the Occupy Wall Street movement,
or even the Tea Party.
both expressing frustration with the growing economic divide.
Exactly. And even though the economy recovered in the 80s,
It wasn't the same.
no, the nature of growth was different.
How so?
It was more concentrated at the top.
Meaning?
The wealthy saw the biggest gains.
Well, wages for the middle class stagnated.
That's where the term the 1% comes from.
Right, that tiny fraction of people who hold most of the wealth.
And this trend has continued,
Leading up to the 2008 financial crisis.
which really exposed the fragility of the system.
And that widening gap between the haves and have-nots.
And Housel argues that the response to the crisis
like the bailouts and quantitative easing?
actually ended up making things worse in some ways.
How so?
Those policies disproportionately benefited the wealthy.
Further widening the gap,
It created this sense that the system was rigged.
fueling more anger and frustration.
It's a complex story.
But it helps explain some of the challenges we face today.
So Housel's point is that the psychology of the modern consumer.
It's shaped by this historical backdrop.
We're living in a time of unprecedented prosperity,
But it doesn't feel that way for many people.
Wages are stagnant, costs are rising.
The gap between the rich and everyone else keeps growing.
It's this disconnect between economic growth
And the lived experience of many Americans.
that's driving a lot of anxiety and discontent.
So it's not just about individual choices.
It's about those broader forces
The historical context, the cultural norms, the narratives,
that influence how we think about money.
how we spend it, save it, invest it.
We're all players in this complex economic game,
And our choices are influenced by the rules of that game.
even if we don't always understand those rules.
But Housel doesn't just leave us with a bleak analysis, does he?
No, he offers a path forward.
I'm eager to hear about it.
He emphasizes the power we have as individuals
To make choices that align with our values.
to create a sense of financial security and well-being.
So what's the first step?
Awareness.
Awareness of what?
Our own psychology when it comes to money.
Understanding our biases, our fears, our emotional triggers.
The things that can lead to bad financial decisions.
It's about being mindful,
Intentional with our choices.
rather than just reacting to whatever's happening around us.
Exactly. Being the driver, not the passenger.
I like that.
And that requires financial literacy
Understanding the basics.
of personal finance, investing, risk management,
Empowering ourselves with knowledge.
so we can make informed choices.
Instead of relying on others or getting caught up in get-rich-quick schemes.
We got to take control of our own financial destinies.
Housel also talks about defining our own goals and values.
It's not about keeping up with the Joneses,
It's about figuring out what we want to achieve with our money.
the kind of life we want to create,
And that requires some honest self-reflection.
what truly matters to us.
Are we chasing status and possessions?
Or are we seeking security, freedom, and the ability to pursue our passions?
Once we have clarity on our goals,
We can create a plan that supports those aspirations.
and it doesn't have to be a super complicated plan
No, just a simple framework
to guide our decisions.
to keep us focused on what we're trying to achieve.
It's like a roadmap
A guiding principle.
to help us make conscious choices about how we spend, save, and invest.
And remember, this plan should be flexible.
Life throws curveballs.
We need to be able to adapt,
It's an ongoing process.
not a one-time event.
We ought to be willing to reassess, adjust, and course correct.
Always learning, always evolving.
Housel also emphasizes that financial success.
It's not just about earning more money,
It's also about managing our expenses,
making sure we're not living beyond our means,
living within our means,
finding contentment with what we have,
appreciating the abundance in our life.
rather than constantly striving for more.
And when it comes to investing,
Yeah,
Housel acknowledges its power,
as a tool for building wealth
but he cautions against speculation.
and chasing quick riches.
It's about long-term thinking,
Patience and the willingness to ride out market fluctuations
investing in things you understand,
and believe in.
not blindly following trends or the advice of others.
He even has this interesting perspective on volatility.
I'm listening.
He views it as a fee, not a fine.
A fee,
Like the fee you pay to enter an amusement park.
or to watch a movie.
We pay a fee in the form of volatility to participate in the market.
So it's not a punishment.
It's the price of admission.
And if the movie's good enough,
The volatility might be worth enduring.
I love that
It
analogy.
reframes how we think about those market swings.
It's not something to be feared.
It's a natural part of the process.
There's no such thing as a risk-free return.
And this ties into his advice about having a margin of safety
Not investing more than you can afford to lose.
and being prepared for the unexpected,
Thinking about your investments as a portfolio.
not individual stocks or assets.
Diversifying your risk.
Understanding that some investments will do better than others.
It's about the big picture.
The overall health of your financial ecosystem.
Now, Housel wraps up with a really comforting message. Be kind to yourself when it comes to money.
So important.
We tend to be so hard on ourselves.
We beat ourselves up over every mistake.
Every missed opportunity.
But we're all human.
We all make mistakes.
Financial success isn't about being perfect.
It's about learning from those mistakes.
Making better choices in the future.
And recognizing that our journey is unique.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
What works for one person might not work for another.
The important thing is to be intentional.
Making sure our choices are aligned with our values, goals, and risk tolerance.
Finding a path that leads to financial security.
Peace of mind, and the freedom to live a meaningful life.
But enough from us for now.
What's next?
Housel includes some great personal reflections.
Oh, I like those parts.
I think those would be great to dive into next.
Yeah, let's hear what he has to say about his own experiences. So, ready to hear these confessions, Housel? talks about?
He starts with his parents, how they went through these different financial phases.
From struggling to more comfortable,
Even though his dad became a doctor, their income increased
they still held on to those frugal habits.
from those earlier years.
It's amazing how those early experiences stick with you,
Shape your relationship with money.
even when your situation changes.
Those beliefs and patterns, they run deep.
Housel also talks about his own career, wanting to go into investment banking at first.
High salaries, the bonuses, it's tempting.
Especially when you're young, trying to figure things out.
He interned at a bank, long hours, intellectually stimulating. He realized how much of his life it was consuming.
Always on call.
His schedule controlled by someone else,
Made him question if it was worth it.
even with the big paycheck.
It's a good reminder that money isn't everything.
Sometimes prioritizing time, freedom, purpose,
That can lead to more happiness.
even if it means less money,
That's what he did, walked away from banking.
to find something with more autonomy.
More control over his time.
It's about defining success on your own terms.
What does a fulfilling life look like?
What are your non-negotiables?
What are you willing to compromise on?
And what are you absolutely not?
I remember Housel makes this observation. The U.S. is the richest country.
But are Americans happier now than in the 50s?
When they had less wealth,
It challenges that idea that more money equals more happiness,
we have more stuff, more information, more technology.
but also more stress, anxiety, social isolation.
It's like we've traded well-being for possessions.
He points out that work has changed.
How so?
In the 50s, more jobs were manufacturing, agriculture,
Physical work.
with a clear start and end,
Now it's more knowledge-based.
service-oriented,
Mental and emotional labor.
harder to switch off.
Blurred lines between work and life.
Technology keeps us connected constantly,
Always on, always working.
even when we're not at the office.
It takes a toll.
Stress, burnout, dissatisfaction
Even though we have so much.
makes you think about what we're really striving for.
More stuff.
For more time, freedom, peace of mind.
Housel talks about his own desire for financial independence.
A recurring theme.
Him and his wife decided to pay off their mortgage early.
Not the most financially optimal choice.
But they valued the security and freedom of owning their home outright.
Sometimes emotional well-being trumps optimization,
It's okay to make a choice that feels right.
even if it goes against conventional wisdom.
Prioritizing joy, peace of mind, control.
It's refreshing in a world that's all about maximizing profits.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the one key takeaway?
Financial success isn't just about formulas or picking stocks.
It's about understanding ourselves.
Our behaviors, emotions, those irrational thoughts about money,
How those deep-seated beliefs and patterns influence our decisions.
sometimes leading us down the wrong path.
It's about self-awareness.
Understanding our own financial psychology.
Making choices aligned with our values and goals.
It's like money is a mirror.
Reflecting back our values, fears, aspirations.
By understanding the psychology,
We can make more conscious choices.
choices that lead to security, peace of mind, a more fulfilling life.
That's powerful, money as a mirror.
Encouraging us to look inward, examine our beliefs,
So, listener, pay attention to those stories you tell yourself about money.
question those assumptions, challenge those biases.
And be kind to yourself.
There's no one right way to do this.
It's about finding what works for you.
What aligns with your values and goals?
Creating a financial life that supports the life you want to live.
If you're intrigued by these ideas, check out Housel's book.
The Psychology of Money.
It's a thought-provoking read
It'll challenge your assumptions.
and inspire you to make more intentional choices.
Thanks for joining us on this Deep Dive.
We hope you gain some valuable insights.
We'll be back soon with another exploration.
Until then, keep learning, keep growing.
And keep questioning the world around you.